Kia ora tātou, ko Lauren James, tōku ingoa. Just checking you can all hear me. Great, well, welcome to our Leading Today webinar today. Today's a special day, it's International Women's Day, and it's a worthy day of acknowledging, celebrating, and also reflecting. I am the Network Sustainability Lead for BusinessNZ Network, and we are a member-based organisation, and one of the things we do is develop and deliver programs in sustainability. So here today, I'm joined by other, not other, but really accomplished women. So we're all in good company with Denise, Sarah, and Kate going to take us through some inspiration, some opportunity to reflect, and things to think about that are important topics of today. But I just want to quickly get us in the zone. So firstly, something you might not always do on a webinar, can everyone just take a few breaths? Maybe bring your hand to your belly. Take a few counts on your inhale. Pause. And then big exhale, letting go of your morning. See if you can keep that deeper breathing going as you arrive and engage with today. Cool. And I will just, it's getting my slides to change. So just take a moment to reflect on these questions. Who is an important woman to you? Who do you admire? Who has taught you something important? Who supports you? And who do you most appreciate in your life? There's every chance that your mother ticks all those boxes, but try and think of some other women as well, and let that reflection and marination continue through the day. You might also think of a woman through history that you think has really done something significant as well. History could also be today. We might meet some soon. So just a few stats that I pulled together that kind of just reflect a bit of the state of play of women. It's not meant to be kind of negative, but less than half of working age women are in the labour market. Less than a third of women are in managerial positions globally. Apparently, it will take another 132 years to close the gender pay gap, but at least in New Zealand, we're in a healthier position with an approximately 10% gap. We know that we have climate challenges. We've got a goal of 1.5 degree warming to stick within, and we're already at 1.1 degrees and counting. We have a whole big bill of damage to pay for after these recent floods, thanks to the other woman in our lives, Gabrielle, who's hopefully not in your who was most supportive question answer, and a significant challenge of modern slavery with a predominance of women in that camp as well. And last but not least, we know in New Zealand and Aotearoa that 80% of Māori women will experience family violence in their lifetime. So some sobering stats, but we know we've got significant challenges, and that women play an important role in addressing these challenges and holding the collective whānau together to guide a community approach forward. So, and my last stat was around obviously the headwinds of the last few years has meant burnout is on the rise, where women, as with people, are carrying and holding more than they ever have before, and with that comes consequences for well-being. Hence why, drum roll, the topics for today are focused on well-being, diversity, and climate change. While you might consider them separate, they're very much intertwined as issues, and I'm sure these ladies will help to weave them as we go. So firstly, we have Dr. Denise Quinlan, who's founder and director of New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience, followed by Sarah Archer, who's head of diversity and inclusion at Chorus. And from our own kind of wider whānau as well. We've got Kate Wilson-Butler, who was recently head of climate at the Sustainable Business Council, who's now taken on the ambitious challenge of Director of Climate Sustainability and ESG at Chapman Tripp. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Denise and let you share your slides, and if you have any, and or take us through what you're talking about. And then there'll be some Q&A following Denise before the other two speakers, and then a collective Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and come in at those question points. Anyway, welcome. Take it away, Denise.
Kia ora koutou, ko Denise Quinlan aho. I am delighted to be here with you, and I don't have any slides. I am in another conference room with my fingers crossed that we get peace and quiet for the next few minutes. So I'm really excited to be here, and I love the topic because through this year, you know, you have a great break over Christmas, do a whole load of reading and get really clear on what you want for the year. And I'm very clear that connection and long-term thinking, seventh generation thinking, is what we need to pull us through the storm clouds that are gathering. And we need that collectively as well as individually. When we look at things like burnout, burnout is an individual response to a systemic problem. The drivers of burnout are all workplace. We have to address things in our workplace. And so what I want to talk to you about today isn't individual resilience, it's collective resilience. So we know that resilience grows between us as well as within us. And the quality of the groups that we're part of and the quality of the interactions that we have matter and make a difference. And I often describe it as, if individual resilience is teaching you how to swim, collective resilience is paying attention to the health of the pool that we're all swimming in. How is the water? What is the quality like? And is it a pool that's safe and supportive to be in? And that makes a huge difference to what's possible. To the extent that we can say we are each other's environment. If we spend so much time worrying about environment, how are the chairs, are the desks ergonomic, is the air conditioning okay? But the truth is that the person you are sitting next to, whom you spend your day with, they have a much bigger impact on your well-being than your chair. We literally are the environment that we create for other people. And, you know, some days I think I show up and I'm Nelson and Blenheim and mainly sunshine. And some days I'm the Chatham Islands, mainly rain. So think about how you are in your environment and the impact you're having, but also have a moment to just think about who makes work a better place for you. You know, who is a really significant positive influence on your environment, because it does make a difference. Collective resilience, when we have collective resilience, there are so many different ways we can get there. And recently I've been thinking there are so many layers. There's psychological safety, there's psychological capital, social capital, belonging and inclusion, DEI. And sometimes I think it's the desperate effort of researchers to come up with new labels to get us to pay attention to the same thing. And that is how we are together in groups matters. So I want to just talk a little bit about psychological safety, because why? When Google did a long-term project a few years back called Project Aristotle to look at what factors determine the successful performance of their different groups. And they found that the single factor that explained success and high performance in their groups was psychological safety, by which we mean the ability to feel safe, to feel included, and to feel that it's safe to make mistakes, that you won't be humiliated, laughed at, or excluded. And we can think about psychological safety as having 3 levels. The first is the safe ground of belonging and inclusion. People get me, they make me feel like I belong, they will include me in things. The next level up is learning and contribution. It's safe for me to learn, and that means it's safe for me to make mistakes. And the third level is challenge and innovation. If we really want to be an innovative organization, to really create something special, to tackle and solve the massive problems that face us in climate and sustainability, we need organizations where it's safe to challenge. It's safe to say, I disagree, and I think there's a better way of doing this. So these are the kind of organizations that we want to build. And what I think is really beautiful about it, or what I really appreciate, is that if we can make psychological safety a reality in our organizations, it means that we've made it safe there is diversity and inclusion for women, that large ignored majority. We're 51%, but somehow we don't get acknowledged. Minorities, for ethnic minorities, for disability, for diverse gender. And all of this by way of saying, if we really want to get on and perform at our best, we need to have collective resilience. And that means we need to learn how to be in organizations where we can make people feel like they belong, where it's safe to learn and contribute. And the question that comes next is, well, how do we do that? And the research is very reassuring in this respect, in that it is, to use a cliche, not rocket science. It's about really basic things like work routines that allow people to know each other as people. It's a rehumanizing of the workforce. Other things like having collective reward rather than individual reward where possible, but also sharing the positive impact that our work has on. When your work has a positive impact, that is motivating in itself. But some of us aren't at the front line, or we don't get to hear the feedback. And so one of the changes that you could look at in your organization is, how do we let people know they've had a positive impact and their work is making a difference? And, it's 2023. Can we go beyond the newsletter? How can we create networks that connect people within an organization, that let them hear, see, and feel the impact they're having? And I'm probably going to stop very soon and just take questions. But what I want to leave you with is the thought that belonging, no matter how rich, how powerful you are, you cannot make your own belonging and inclusion. Belonging and inclusion is a gift that other people extend to you. So when you go back into your workplace, how can you extend the gift of belonging and inclusion to as many people as you can? Because it matters, and it matters for all of us here. And we are in a position to shape change. And the workforce needs us, it needs the thinking that we bring. So I will stop there and say, how can you extend the gift of belonging and inclusion to more people so that we build collective resilience? Thank you so much for your time. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Denise. Perhaps if you have questions, just pop them in the chat, and then we can get Denise to answer them while we have her. Thank you very much for the inspirational pearls of wisdom and the poetic language.
Thank you. And while we are waiting for, and if no questions come, I want to give a plug for a book that I have really enjoyed reading in the last couple of years, Invisible Women by Caroline Criada Perez. And what she's looking at is the data gap, where women are not represented in research, how underrepresented we are in logistics, town planning, health research, and how we can and say, as women, we need to push in science for sex disaggregation of research so that we can see how are things affecting us. This makes a difference.
Nice. Just checking. Thank you. Just checking if we have any other questions. I think we've got
a question, Lauren.
Of course. Sure.
Thank you, Denise. That was really insightful and poetic, as Lauren said. I'm really interested in your comments around psychological safety, because this is something I've been learning and kind of reading a little bit about. And I wonder if you had any thoughts for those organisations where psychological safety isn't there or has been a challenge in the past. What are some steps that people could take, not necessarily the management people, but just staff could take to help establish that where it's not there or it has been kind of disestablished from past practice?
I think, you know, ideally there is support from the top, but we're not always there. There is so much, you might not be able to change a whole organization, you can change a team. Get together and work with your team. And the same applies to burnout. You might not be able to change the way an organization works, but if you can change the culture in your team, you can build an oasis of psychological safety. And that is literally acknowledging you are human beings. You are not cogs in a wheel. And the more we know each other, the more we are able to respect that difference. And so we do really simple exercises like put people who don't know each other together. How many things can you find in common within 3 minutes? And at the end, I always say, would you be more likely to ask or offer help to this person now? Would you be more or less likely to trust them? Knowing each other is the bedrock of trust and inclusion. And if we never give people time, so when I speak at things now, I will always make time for people to have conversation in their teams, because if they're not getting that conversation time at work, then we need to, it is important, I will make time for it. So it's allowing people to be human and to know each other as people. And if we can do that, so much good stuff follows on from it. Great question.
Thank you. I think we've got a couple more. So one is from Cal. Kia ora, Denise. Our expectations around environment, and I think this is more workforce, but different, like old school or new school, as each generation enters the workforce. So I guess it's kind of considering age and I guess the culture that comes with age. Yeah.
But there's also, we can, if you think about the ecological model, there's you, and we can go out to culture, and we can go out to industry. There are some national cultures, there are some industries where the culture is really flat hierarchy and really inclusive. And there are other cultures that are much more hierarchical. Whatever way culture is, it can change. And culture is how we do things around here. And it is the sum total of the people. And so I would say, if the person asking this question is a younger person who would like a more informal culture where it's safe for them to speak up, then find the smallest possible circle in the organization where it is possible to do that, and keep building those islands of safety, because culture changes, you know. And there are sometimes where we do it really deliberately. For instance, in aviation safety, we found out that plane accidents were far more likely in very hierarchical cultures where it wasn't safe for a junior officer to question a pilot. And we learned how to change culture to improve safety. What's the rationale for changing culture in your organization? And why will you value making change? These are important discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing you've said, well, you've said many things, Denise, but really kind of mapping the individual to the collective, and the not even the boundary, but the exchange between those, and the agency in both to create change. And you've obviously been in this game for a while, and it's not really a game.
But if we make it a game, it's more playful. Why not?
True, exactly. So treat it as though you're on the playground and keep trying and experimenting as you go. What is it that you do, or what kind of few things do you do even each day to bring this to life for you, and that you would think are most impactful for each of us to start doing?
To be able to share individually, I think being really clear on priorities, what's important and what I'll say no to, and then self-compassion for when I stuff up. And then the psychological safety in my team is when I can make that explicit and transparent. And I will be able to say when I've stuffed up, and I'll be able to go to other people for support. And so one of the things that I think is an important strategy and practice in our organization is sharing the wins, sharing the stuff ups, and being there for each other to share those so that we are known to each other and can offer each other support.
Great, thank you. We've got time for possibly one more question if there is one, but I'm not hearing anyone. And speakers, of course, you are allowed in our inclusive virtual environment to also ask a question. No, I think, yeah, there's definitely some real gems from there, but the first thing I wrote down as a soundbite was that resilience grows within us as well as between us. So let's round out on that note, but thank you so much.
And honestly, if I could say one more thing, it would be,
of course,
women have always been good at this. We have always been good at collective resilience and standing with and looking after each other. And it's still time to do that. And it's time to, if we're not getting what we need, we can, by grouping together is how we've always found strength, and being stronger advocates for what we want and need. The changes that we're advocating for are important and will benefit everyone. We need to just keep going. Thank you. Real pleasure to be with you all today. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much,
Kia ora.
Denise. We really appreciate it. Kia ora. Thank you for your time and great questions as well. So next we have, building on this, Sarah Archer, as we've said, Head of Diversity and Inclusion from Chorus. And here to kind of bring that topic into the conversation, weaving on top of the wellbeing, resilience, women pieces that we've already started to engage around. Welcome, Sarah.
Kia ora, Lauren and Denise, thank you for that. There's definitely a common thread of psychological safety running through. So kia ora tātou, ko Mapmanaia Tamunga, ko Matapori Beach Te Awa, no Whangarei Northland Aho, ko Ni Flower toko Archer Whānau, ko Sarah toko Ingoa. So today I'm going to take you through a very high-level whistle-stop tour of our diversity, equity and inclusion strategy, and highlight, I guess, the alignment and the collaboration between wellbeing and sustainability. So first of all, I thought we'd start with just a definition in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion. And also we'll move on to a little bit more of a deeper dive into the difference between equity and equality. So diversity, I guess for us, is around the characteristics that make someone similar to and or different to someone else. And when we talk about diversity, ultimately it comes down to diversity of thought. And a lot of that is, I guess it's through our lifetime's experiences and our backgrounds, but there's also some differences that come through in terms of our demographics as well, which is why when we talk about diversity, equity and inclusion and we focus on strategies and initiatives, we generally do it from a sort of a demographic or a dimension point of view. If I flip across to inclusion, so Denise talked very much around a sense of belonging and feeling included. And that's absolutely integral to successful diversity and inclusion. Like I always say that you really one is pointless without the other. I've worked in organisations and been in environments where it's been very diverse, and let's face it, New Zealand is an incredibly diverse country, but we're not really always that inclusive. And so focusing on inclusion and that sense of belonging and creating that psychological safety is absolutely paramount to what we do. And if we think about equity, in my experience, sometimes diversity, equity and inclusion can be a little bit confrontational for people and make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. And sometimes it comes down to the difference between equity and equality. So people often struggle with thinking about equity in terms of creating advantages or disadvantages for others. Which ironically has always been one of the significant issues for decades in terms of achieving diversity and inclusion for everyone. So let's just touch on equality versus equity. And I'm sure you've seen this image or one similar to it, and I love it because it represents the definitions between the two very well. So they're different concepts. So equality generally refers to the equal opportunity or the same levels of support for all segments of society. And we can see that represented in the first image. So you've got three people, three level boxes, all of the same size, but they still can't all see over the barrier or the fence. So equity goes a step further and actually gives varying level of steps represented in the middle box there in terms of the different levels of box, because we're adapting to people's different needs in terms of what they want. And then the third image there, or the third step in the picture, is actually removing that barrier in the first place, so that actually we have equality, and that's equity, basically working on equity to achieve equality. And in order to do that, sometimes it's visible and it's invisible, and we need to think differently in terms of how we remove barriers for people. So often we cater to the majority of demographics or people in the environment or the workplace that we're in, and we unconsciously behave in a way that can exclude others. And people always say to me, well, how do you learn not to do that? And really it's actually quite simple. Having a growth mindset, having a really open mind, being curious, learning about other people, learning about other cultures, practices and protocols other than your own, and accommodating those. And we think about that often in terms of interviews when we're giving examples. So we think about corporate New Zealand, and often we want to attract people of greater or diverse ethnicity into our business. But corporate New Zealand has typically been brought on practice and protocols of Pākehā white men and or women. And so we need to think about, well, what is a different way of doing that in terms of making it a more comfortable cultural environment and or for other demographics as well in terms of what they need. So this is our diversity and equity and inclusion strategy at Chorus. Now, we developed the strategy and launched it in August of last year. The input into the strategy was from an external audit that we did on our workplace culture, because actually, whilst all of our engagement surveys are telling us that Chorus is a great place to work, when we looked at voluntary female turnover at Chorus, this is around about a year and a half ago, it was double that of men and well above the average. So something wasn't right. So an external organisation came in, did a workplace audit and kind of lifted the hood on some of those, I guess, unconscious behaviours and systemic behaviours that exist in workplaces, and certainly in workplaces that historically have been industries that have a high proportion of men and less women and or less other, I guess, minorities. A diverse group of people across the organisation all fit into this at various levels, and it's also based on the AIM, which is the Aotearoa Inclusivity Matrix framework in terms of best practice with DEI. So the high-level outline of the strategy, on the left-hand side, you'll see that it's actually around thriving people, which is a key pillar in my sustainability strategies in terms of our priorities, in terms of what we're focusing on. And then on the far right of the screen, you'll see in front of you, we have Hauhora or Wellbeing. And so that is absolutely integral to thriving people. And so Hauhora is made up of Te Whara Tapawha, which is the Māori view of wellbeing, and it is the 4 pillars in the roof in terms of the whare, the house. And all of those aspects in wellbeing, and by focusing on all of those aspects of wellbeing, we're essentially wrapping our arms around our people, creating good wellbeing, creating good behaviours, taking into account the 7 dimensions in the middle of the screen, having those as sort of focus or priority areas, and ensuring that we have thriving people as the end outcome. You'll see that the aspiration on the left hand of the screen talks about fair, talks about inclusive. It deliberately calls out equitable culture because, as I say, again, we need to focus on equity to achieve equality. It talks about celebrating differences as our strengths. And Denise has mentioned that in terms of putting people in a room, finding out what was different about each other, how you do things differently, and actually valuing that. The connecting on shared values is, I guess, psychological safety, good well-being, thriving people, diversity of thought, regardless of who we are in terms of culture, backgrounds. Generally speaking, as human behaviours, we can all connect on shared values. As an example, I talk to people around the pepeha or the mihi. Why do we do that as a sense of introduction? It's a sense of building connection. It's a sense of building trust. And once people actually understand that, they feel more comfortable with, I guess, participating in giving their mihi or saying their pepeha. Calling out the psychological safety that you'll see on the screen on the left middle, confidence and te reo, and that's a really good example of creating psychological safety in order to achieve diversity and inclusion at Chorus. And so rather than talk about or aim at this stage for competency and te reo, it's actually about aiming for confidence. So a lot of people who do not speak te reo and or another language feel very vulnerable about speaking it or giving it a go, particularly executive teams, boards, senior leaders, because they're used to being good at what they do. And so they don't want to sort of mess up or say anything or mispronounce words. I think it's also important to point out that we know that pronunciation is incredibly important in te reo because often if we're mispronouncing words, they have another meaning. But like anything, there's a phase and there's a pace, and we need to walk before we can run. All of our objectives, we have measures in place because just like anything else, in our lives, having measures in place helps us to track our performance and helps to keep us guided and keep us on track. So if we look at thriving people, I pulled this slide together, which is from a slide, not necessarily our sustainability strategy as such at Chorus, but it's a slide that we use with some of our departments and business functions across the business. And to the right of your screen, you'll see the Thriving People pillar. And those measures shown on the screen are relating to our Thriving People and our diversity and inclusion strategy. And so our measures in place there represent ethnicity, represent knowledge, represent our reducing gender pay gap in terms of creating equity for women within a business. We're allies of our rainbow community, and again, psychological safety is the common theme there. And we've recently gained the accessibility tick as well, so we've got an action plan in place in terms of a whole raft of work that we need to do in that space. I've pulled this slide together just to demonstrate in terms of wellbeing the measures that we hold ourselves accountable for and work towards. And so these are our measures that we take from our engagement survey. And our engagement survey is approximately every 4 months. We've just shifted it from quarterly. And we very much focus on all aspects of wellbeing. So we sort of talk about health and wellbeing overall, but then we look at the mental wellbeing, physical wellbeing, social wellbeing, and the organisational support. We take it a step further, and we then look at that data again by demographic. And so we'll look at these 4 drivers of wellbeing for our rainbow community, for our women, and for our women as well. We're looking at that in terms of, I guess, career levels of seniority in the business, because there are some differences that play out in terms of career levels within Chorus. And it is about intersectionality as well. So when we're looking at our data in terms of age, when we're looking at our data in terms of gender and or ethnicity, they all tend to cross over with one another as well. Oh, sorry, just on this, just to point out, Denise, it was interesting talking about the people connection and the focus on doing things together and that collective piece, because I've seen a theme coming through in terms of our social wellbeing driver. And so we currently sit in the top 10% for social wellbeing in terms of our data, and we're meeting top 5% in our other drivers. So social wellbeing is an area that I think we need to work on, and I've seen that fluctuate in terms of the impact of COVID and lockdowns and flex working as well, which has been really quite interesting. And so look, finally, on the whistle-stop tour of D&I at Chorus, again, people sort of ask me, how do we get involved in this? How do we get involved in this from an organisational perspective? Both large corporates, and most large corporates these days have, diversity and inclusion strategies in place. But what I do see is that we have a large number of small to medium-sized enterprises in New Zealand which don't tend to focus so much in this area because it's either too hard or they think that it's too expensive. But ultimately, it's about data and facts. It's about having an adaptive mindset, and it's around human behaviours. And if we factor all of that in, we can all work together and all take steps to improve diversity and inclusion in our workplaces. And a couple of call-outs on the screen there. The key internal stakeholders are key. So learning and development, sustainability, wellbeing, they're all interlocked in terms of what we do with diversity, equity and inclusion. We need to embed diversity and inclusion as everyday behaviours. So rather than having these kind of optional silo learning material pieces that people can opt into, actually it's common sense, it's good leadership, it's good practice, psychological safety, inclusiveness, belonging. It just makes good commercial sense. And there's a raft of research and data that shows us the commercial benefits of doing diversity, equity and inclusion well. Prioritise and focus on initiatives that add value. So I touched on the intersectionality, but don't get too hung up on being too siloed in some of the work or some of the initiatives that we do, and think cross-functionally in terms of bang for buck, in terms of value. Subject matter expertise. So I, as a head of D&I, I am an enabler, I'm an advocate, I'm a champion. I am not all things to everyone in terms of my demographic. I am not, I'm a first generation New Zealander. I don't have any disabilities, so I don't pretend that I'm an expert in those areas. So seek support. And again, most organisations have memberships or partnerships in place, and some of them are not expensive, but I think we probably don't use them as well and as often as we should. Include diversity in the goal setting, as I say, embedded in everything that we do. And I guess in terms of from an individual point of view, it's just that growth mindset, think in the adaptive ways of working, and be really curious and ask people what they need. It's really just about forming those connections and making sure that everybody has a voice and is heard. And I will end on that and open to any questions, I believe, after Kate has spoken with us. Is that correct, Lauren?
Yeah, I think it would be good to transition to Kate, but if we just have one question literally just what is something that you either, again, similar to what I asked Denise, you personally do to ensure that you're, I guess, modeling and or representing that diversity of thought? Can be quite a big concept, but what simplistically is the one thing you do, and also your number one kind of non-negotiable, or at least for your own well-being?
I think for myself, I constantly challenge my own bias. Having said that, I've also got a good sense of humour. I think sometimes we can get a little bit wrapped up, a little bit complicated in terms of diversity and inclusion, and it actually doesn't need to be that difficult. And we do need to be mindful that our behaviours are respectful and that we're curious and open-minded. But again, having a bit of sense of humour really, really helps. In terms of my own well-being, I think that was the question in terms of reflecting on that. What do I do in that space? I ensure that I have balance. So having balance is really important to me, and I think that's different for everybody. So be it sitting outside for half an hour, having a glass of wine, we all have our different ways of creating that balance. But I think not being afraid to say no to additional work, pressures and asks and so on. I think I probably did say yes too often when I was younger, when I was sort of in my 20s and 30s, but I'm hitting 50 these days, and I like to think that with age comes wisdom. So say no.
Love it. Thank you very much, Sarah. And kia ora, Kate. That has a good ring to it.
Hello, Lauren, and thank you, Sarah, and what wonderful wisdom we've had from these wahine this morning. Well, afternoon, isn't it? What you just said, Sarah, reminded me of something I read from Brene Brown recently, which was, I will live with discomfort rather than resentment. So that saying no, and even though it might be uncomfortable in the moment, actually maybe it's good for well-being. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I will give you a whistle-stop overview of the role of women in climate action and why women are uniquely placed to lead the change. And I'll try and keep this really quick so that we have some time for questions at the end. So by way of introduction, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kate Wilson-Butler toku ingoa. As Lauren said, I'm currently Director of Climate Sustainability and ESG at Chapman Tripp, but past lives have included being head of climate action at SBC, and I've also been at MFAT for many years doing international climate negotiations and working in James Shaw's office. So despite all of that, I actually didn't know much about the detail of the role of women in climate action. So I actually want to thank you, Lauren, for giving me this topic, because I've had a real deep dive into the vast amount of literature and research that's gone into the link between gender equity and climate action and the role of women in the climate transition. And I should probably say that these are obviously my personal views, they're not the views of my employer. I don't have slides today because I have 3 points that I'm going to try and keep simple. Firstly, women are most impacted by climate change, but they're also uniquely placed to lead the transition. Secondly, there have been improvements in the representation of women and girls in climate action, but there's still a long way to go. And thirdly, there are some practical steps that you and your organisations can take to help improve the status quo, or improve on the status quo. So on the first point, there's lots of research out there that shows how women are more impacted by the results of climate change. So I think there's a UN study that says something like 80% of those displaced by climate change are women. And research also shows that in the aftermath of extreme weather events, women are also more likely to be subject to gender-based violence. And obviously women make up the bulk of many rural and lower income communities that are reliant on the natural environment for their livelihood and well-being. So that's the bad news. The good news is that just as climate change has been described as a threat multiplier, women have been described as solutions multipliers, which is, I think, one of my favourite takeouts of all of this research that I've done. And I guess I just wanted to highlight how that can play out in 4 spheres: so the public, the private, the global, and the local. So in the public sphere, there's some research that shows that a higher proportion of female representation in Parliament actually results in the passing of more stringent climate laws. And countries that have lots of women in Parliament are also more likely to ratify international environmental treaties. So that's exciting. On the private side, there's also some research that shows that a higher percentage of women on corporate boards leads to better corporate disclosures around emissions and better action on those emissions reductions. Also good news. Then at the local level, there's links between the role of women and participation of women in natural resource management and good outcomes in relation to the governance of those resources and conservation outcomes. And there's also some interesting facts and figures around the role of women in international climate diplomacy, a topic close to my heart, which basically shows that having women in these international processes, including peace processes, but that it extends to the climate change process, can actually boost the collective intelligence. I think this goes back a little bit to some of the things that Denise was saying, and broadens the perspective of the negotiating group and can actually lead to more positive outcomes. So I think women have this incredible role, and there's research to back it up. That notwithstanding, women and girls are still really underrepresented when it comes to climate action. So there's also a lot of facts and figures around this. So you've got a lot more countries now talking about the role of women and girls in climate action in their national policies and in their nationally determined contributions, which are their Paris Agreement commitments. But there's still not a lot of integration of those gender considerations into long-term strategic planning for national emissions reductions. So there's still a lot more that could be done to increase the voice of women and girls in those national climate policies, and to make sure that governments are reflecting that. And equally, women are still really underrepresented in public sector leadership on climate and environment. I think about 27% of government ministers the world over are responsible for environment and climate policies. And globally, the number of women, or the proportion of women on these delegations to the UN climate talks has moved up a little bit. So it was, I think, about 18% back in 1995 when everybody started getting together for these big COP meetings. But it's sort of topped out about 37% in 2017, and it's kind of gone back to 35%. So you don't even have half of the delegates who are at these meetings to have these negotiations being women. And even whereas the heads of delegations, so that's a kind of the key official that's there for each country, has hovered really around an average of 20% across those years. So you have the people who are making the decisions, that are in the sort of the important rooms, that are deciding the trajectory of the world on climate, be mostly male, 80% male essentially. The private sector, I'm pleased to report, I'm sure many of you are from the private sector, is showing some more positive progress. So the rise of the role of the Chief Sustainability Officer has shown really positive trends in the gender sort of climate sustainability nexus. So in the US, the percentage of female CSOs has pretty much doubled. I think it was about 28% in 2011, and now it's 54%, or was to 54% back in 2021. And I think that that's really a positive trend as you think about the importance of sustainability and integration of sustainability across broader functions of the organisation, embedding sustainability into corporate strategy and business planning. The CSO will have an increasingly important role. So those are some of the facts and figures and an illustration of how far we have to go in some areas. I've got 3 practical areas that I think that you can focus on, or encourage those within your organisation to focus on to make some progress here. So I think this first piece touches back on what some of Sarah was saying. I think a really key driver of good outcomes here is that when you think about ESG or your environmental, social and governance indicators, think about the intersection between those things, and particularly the nexus between your climate outcomes and your diversity, inclusion and equality. So often you see separate pillars or separate goals under each of these headings, but actually there's research showing that linking those two can lead to more effective outcomes under each of the goals. But also, and I'm sure Sarah's familiar with this research too, companies with more diverse leadership teams actually outperform those who are more homogenous. And research also shows that companies with more women on their boards can outperform others on ESG outcomes. So I think that there's a real role for thinking about the role that increasing gender diversity and other kinds of diversity can play in helping companies achieve their climate goals, and indeed set climate goals. I think the other thing that I was going to mention is the idea of normalizing climate and sustainability as a male issue just as much as it is a female issue. I think traditionally, and there is some research to show that this is the case, that climate change has been considered a female issue, and women have a critical role in climate policy and tend to care more, studies show, about climate change than men. But I don't think that needs to be the case. And while some of these considerations are probably structural and societal, I think this change can start with us to a certain extent. So if we think about the men in our lives, whether they be fathers, partners, sons, friends, workmates, starting to dialogue with them about climate and build that collective consciousness about what is happening with climate change, and I guess awakening that cross-gender and cross-societal category awareness of what needs to be done. And the final point I'll end on is, and I think this will dovetail back nicely with where we started, Lauren, is training women to be leaders. So investing in women so that they have the skills and the voice to speak up on climate, and indeed all of the other issues that might fall under the ESG rubric. So that will give them the ability to shape that public climate policy, but also help shape the targets and the action of their own organisations. And I think I would add to this investing in networks and building networks of women. And these are those connection and support systems that you mentioned at the beginning, Lauren, when you flashed up those questions for us to think about, but also what Denise was talking about with the power of connection. So women are such natural connectors and builders of support systems, and I don't have any research to back that up, I just know it. And I know that there is more that can be done to exploit this natural strength and build networks of women who are leading on climate or want to lead on climate, or can kind of build each other up and connect each other more into the network of women that are doing amazing work in this area. And I just did want to give a plug to one particular initiative that I've been involved with, which is the Women for Climate initiative that's run by Auckland Council, and that is just one of many ways that you can sort of connect as a woman, either as a mentor or a mentee, to kind of think about, what am I trying to achieve, and how might I better empower myself to create the change I want to make in the world? So I will end it there because I'm conscious of time, but yeah, really happy to take any questions. Thanks, Lauren. You're on mute.
Yeah, no, got that. Sorry, I was trying to multitask. So thank you so much, Kate. That was amazing. I think if you're ever looking for someone to do your homework for you, Kate's probably going to be top of the list, right? I'm glad I gave you a topic to research so thoroughly and to distill so effectively. But I think in the interest of time, I mean, we would love to have questions, but my multitasking didn't mean I was doing something away from this. What I was trying to do is pivot in terms of managing time. I'm going to, in our last slide, show you my email address, and so promise that those who want to ask questions, I can field like maybe one, possibly two questions to each of the speakers, and circulate with the recording so that you get your questions answered if you would like. But that will just ensure we respect people's time and let them head off to their day, as much as I would love to get some answers to some juicy and I guess provocative questions. But I think what everyone has done really well today is which women do together is weaving that collective basket of connection of people and also concepts and thoughts and that diversity of thought, and help bring it together in a way that's relatable, understandable, and packaged in 1, 2, 3 tips. So I really appreciate the contribution of the three of you and the audience, and also the wider audience who will receive this and be able to, I guess, share this moment in time with us in other activities they partake in. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I think very topical pieces that we've covered, from focusing on resilience, collective resilience needed more than ever, really leaning into each other and the community around us as we face quite, unprecedented challenges, and that challenges us as individuals and a collective, but where I think the solution and the glue comes in the collective. We've talked about the importance, as we've said, diversity of thought, and also ensuring people thrive, having holistic solutions, which comes from showing up in a different space and challenging ourselves as individuals. And that woman, we have this collective resilience, we have the ability to influence climate solutions, but that it is also a blue job, which is what I'd say to my husband. And we need to actually influence those in our lives, including men. I do see there's a couple of guys on the call, so we're sending that transmission to you as well. With that, thank you again, speakers, Denise, Sarah, Kate. Thank you to attendees and helpers in the background as well. Wish you a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon. Ka kite anō.
Thank you.